There is a machine moving through the ocean right now that you will never see from the shore. It has no need for your attention. It does not announce itself. It simply moves, slowly and deliberately, through water so dark and deep that nothing about it connects to the world you wake up in every morning. It is one of the largest things human hands have ever built. And tonight, we are going to spend some time with it. We are going to slow down the way it moves, think the way its crew thinks, and let the rhythm of the open ocean do what it has always done for tired minds. Carry them somewhere quiet. Welcome to Simple Science. If stories like this help you unwind and let the day go, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We put out new stories every single day. And before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. We genuinely love seeing where our listeners are. Now, let us settle in. Oil tankers are one of the least talked about things in the modern world, which is strange when you consider how important they are. Every plastic bottle, every fuel pump, every synthetic fabric you have ever touched has some connection to the journeys these ships make. They are the quiet backbone of everything, moving slowly and invisibly across oceans that most of us only ever see in photographs. The sheer size of these vessels is the first thing that stops the mind in its tracks, not in an overwhelming way, in the way that looking up at a clear night sky stops the mind. It is not frightening. It is just large, wonderfully, peacefully large. The biggest oil tankers ever built belong to a class called supertankers. Among them, the most famous is a ship known as the Suez Giant. She was later renamed the Yara Viking, and then the Mont, before her final retirement. But regardless of what name she carried, her dimensions stayed the same, and those dimensions are worth sitting with for a moment. She measured 458 meters from her front end, called the bow, to her rear end, called the stern. To put that into something you can picture, the Empire State Building in New York measures about 443 meters from its base to the roof. The Suez Giant was longer than that building is tall, and she floated. She moved, slowly, reliably, through open ocean, carrying cargo that weighed more than most small towns. A ship like this does not stop quickly. That is one of the things about oil tankers that takes a moment to fully absorb. If the captain gives the order to stop the engine, the ship continues moving for several kilometers before it actually comes to rest. There is a quality to that which feels meditative when you sit with it. A machine so massive that momentum becomes part of the experience. You cannot rush it. You cannot hurry it along. It carries its own pace, and the ocean accepts that pace without question. Most large oil tankers travel at between 12 and 15 knots. A knot is roughly 1.85 kilometers per hour, which means these ships cover about 22 to 28 kilometers every single hour. A journey from the oil terminals of the Persian Gulf to the refineries of Japan, which is one of the busiest routes in the world, covers somewhere around 6,000 nautical miles. At a comfortable cruising speed, that trip takes about 18 days. 18 days of open water, with no land visible in any direction, and nothing but the engine humming below, and the sky shifting through its colors above. The crew on a large tanker typically numbers between 20 and 30 people. That is a small group to occupy a vessel the size of several football fields laid end to end. They have their routines, their watches, their duties. But between those duties, there is a kind of quiet that is almost impossible to find anywhere on land. Not silence exactly. The engine is always running. The water is always moving beneath the hull. But the noise is constant and low and steady. And after a day or two at sea, the mind stops trying to identify it and simply accepts it as the sound of where you are. That constant, low hum. That soft, rhythmic press of water against steel. That is the sound we are going to follow tonight, through the tanks and corridors and wide open decks of one of the ocean's quiet giants, through facts that are calming precisely because they are true, and through a world that does not slow down for anything, except that it is, by its own nature, already slow. The port lights have faded now. The city that existed so clearly just an hour ago has become a faint orange glow on the edge of the water. And then nothing at all. The ship does not look back. Ships never do. They move forward at their own pace, and the sea accepts them quietly. And the history of how they came to be out here stretches back much further than most people realize. The first purpose-built oil tanker appeared in 1878. Her name was the Zoroaster, and she was small compared to everything that followed, but she was the beginning of all of it. She was commissioned by a man named Ludwig Nobel, the older brother of Alfred Nobel, the man who invented dynamite and later funded the prize that carries his name. Ludwig was not interested in explosives. He was interested in oil, specifically the vast oil fields around the city of Baku on the western shore of the Caspian Sea, which in the 1870s was becoming one of the most productive oil regions on Earth. The problem was moving the oil out of Baku and into the world. Before the Zoroaster, petroleum was poured into wooden barrels and stacked in the hulls of ordinary cargo ships. It was slow, it was dangerous, it wasted enormous amounts of oil to spillage and evaporation. Ludwig Nobel looked at that system and decided it had to change. He worked with Swedish engineers at the Lindholmen Motala shipyard to design a vessel that carried the oil not in barrels, but in the ship itself, in dedicated iron tanks built directly into the hull. The Zoroaster was 56 meters long, and she could carry about 242 tons of petroleum in her tanks. She ran between Baku and the city of Astrakhan, back and forth across the Caspian, doing quietly what no ship had done before her. 8 years later, in 1886, the concept reached the open ocean. A ship called the Glück auf, which means good luck in German, was built in Newcastle, England, for the German-American Petroleum Company. She was 97 meters long, and she carried her oil in tanks that ran the full length of her hull. The engine room and crew quarters sat at the rear of the ship, which is exactly how modern tankers are still arranged today. The Glück auf proved the design worked not just on a sheltered inland sea, but on the open Atlantic, and she became the template that every oil tanker built since has followed in one way or another. From there, the growth was slow and logical. The ships got longer, the tanks got larger, the engines got stronger. Through the early 20th century, tankers expanded from a few thousand tons of carrying capacity to tens of thousands. After the Second World War, as the world's demand for oil grew faster than anyone had predicted, the ships grew with it. The turning point came from an unexpected direction. In 1956, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, and for a period, the waterway was closed entirely. Tankers that had passed through the canal on the short route from the Persian Gulf to Europe were suddenly forced to sail around the full length of Africa instead. That detour added thousands of miles to every voyage. Shipping companies quickly worked out that the most efficient response was not faster ships, but larger ones. A ship twice the size, carrying twice the cargo, could absorb the cost of the longer route. So, the orders went in, the shipyards expanded, and the supertanker was born, not from engineering ambition alone, but from the very practical need to carry more while travelling further. By the 1970s, the largest tankers ever ordered were entering service. They were so big that many of the world's major ports and canals could not take them at all. They were built for specific routes, between specific terminals, and they ran those routes for decades without ceremony. The world moved on a sea of oil, and the tankers moved with it. If you were standing at the very front of an oil tanker, at the tip of the bow, and you turned to face the back of the ship, you would see something that takes a moment to fully make sense of. A flat, wide deck stretching away from you in a long, almost perfectly level line, covered in pipework and valves and equipment, running so far back that the superstructure at the far end looks small. On a supertanker, that deck might stretch for 350 meters or more. It is, in every practical sense, a road. A steel road bolted to the top of a floating structure, running above water so deep you cannot see the bottom. The deck itself is not bare. Along both sides, running from bow to stern like the veins of a large animal, are pipelines. These are the arteries that move the cargo. When the ship is loading oil at a terminal, these lines fill from the manifold, which is the connection point midship where the shore-based hoses attach. When it is unloading, the cargo pumps below drive the oil back through these same lines and out into the refinery pipes on shore. The system is simple in concept, complex in its engineering, and completely invisible from the outside. A tanker at sea looks, from the water, like a low, flat vessel with almost nothing on top. From the deck, the reality is different. Every inch of it has a purpose. At the very front of the ship, on the forecastle deck, there are the mooring winches. These are large, heavy machines that handle the thick steel cables and ropes used to tie the ship to a berth. When a tanker comes into port after weeks at sea, these winches are the first things to work. The lines go out, the tugs push, the ship edges toward the dock, and slowly the mooring team on the forecastle secures the bow, while the team at the stern does the same at the other end. It is a careful, unhurried process that can take an hour or more from first approach to fully secured. The superstructure sits at the stern. That is the raised section of the ship where everything human happens. The bridge, which is the room from which the ship is navigated, sits at the very top. Below it are the officers' cabins, the crew quarters, the galley where food is prepared, the mess room where meals are eaten, the recreation spaces, the laundry, the medical room. On a large tanker, this block rises 6 or 7 decks above the main deck level. From the bridge windows, the view forward across the deck is extraordinary, particularly in calm weather. You are looking along the length of a machine the size of a city block, and beyond it, in every direction, is water. The funnel rises from the superstructure, usually painted in the colours of the shipping company. It carries exhaust gases from the main engine up and away from the ship. Depending on how the engine is running and what fuel it is burning, the exhaust might be almost invisible. a faint heat shimmer in the air, or it might trail a thin dark ribbon behind the ship for miles before the wind breaks it apart. Below the waterline, which is the hidden 3/4 of the ship, the hull is shaped for efficiency. The bow is bulbous, meaning it has a large rounded protrusion below the surface that reduces water resistance at cruising speed. This design, called a bulbous bow, became standard on large ships in the 1960s and can reduce fuel consumption by up to 15%. You cannot see it from the surface. It does its work quietly, underwater in the dark. The hull is painted in anti-fouling paint below the waterline to slow the growth of barnacles and seaweed on the steel. Above the waterline, it is usually a single solid colour, most often red or black or dark grey. The paint weathers over a voyage, and by the time a tanker enters port after a long passage, it carries the marks of the journey on it. Salt streaks, waterline stains, the slow evidence of weeks at sea. She is not a beautiful ship in the way a sailing vessel is beautiful. She has no grace in her lines, no elegance in her profile. What she has is something more useful than beauty. She has purpose, made visible in every weld and plate and fitting, from the bow that pushes through the water to the stern that trails a long white wake behind her in the dark. Below the superstructure, below the crew quarters and the galley and the officers' cabins, below the waterline itself, there is a space that most passengers on ordinary ships never see, and that most people on land do not know exists in quite the way it does. The engine room of a large oil tanker is not a small, tidy mechanical closet. It is a space that rises through 5 or 6 decks, lit in places by fluorescent light and in others by the glow of instrument panels, filled with the low, constant sound of machinery doing what it was built to do without stopping. The main engine sits at the center of everything. On a very large crude carrier, the type of supertanker most commonly in service today. This is almost always a 2-stroke, slow-speed marine diesel engine. These engines are built by a small number of specialist manufacturers, most notably MAN Energy Solutions and Wärtsilä, and they are among the largest combustion engines on Earth. A typical example might weigh around 2,000 tons. It might stand 12 meters tall, which is roughly 4 floors. Its cylinders are so wide that a person could, in theory, stand inside one. What makes these engines unusual compared to a car engine or a generator is the speed at which they turn. While a car engine might run at 2,000 or 3,000 revolutions per minute, a large marine diesel runs at between 80 and 120 revolutions per minute. That is extraordinarily slow for a combustion engine. 1 revolution roughly every half second. The pistons move up and down at a pace you could almost follow with your eye if the engine were visible, which it is not, because the whole mechanism is sealed within its casing. What you can see are the external components, the fuel injectors, the exhaust manifold, the enormous crankshaft housing, and the connecting shaft that runs from the engine through the hull to the propeller outside. The propeller on a VLCC is typically between 8 and 10 meters in diameter. It turns slowly, in keeping with the engine that drives it, and it pushes the ship through the water with a kind of unhurried authority. The whole system, engine to shaft to propeller, is built for sustained efficiency over very long distances, not for speed. It is the opposite of every performance engine you have ever heard described. The engineers who work in this space tend to be practical quiet people who are at home with noise and heat. The temperature in the lower engine room can reach 40 degrees Celsius or more. The sound level without ear protection is high enough to cause damage over time. The engineers wear hearing protection as a matter of course. They do their rounds, check their gauges, record their readings, and manage a system that, once running properly, requires less constant intervention than you might expect. A well-maintained marine diesel at sea is a stable thing. It wants to run. It runs. The fuel that powers these engines is called heavy fuel oil, sometimes referred to as bunker fuel. It is the thickest, heaviest product that comes out of an oil refinery. What is left over after the lighter products like petrol and diesel have been extracted. At room temperature, it is almost solid, closer in consistency to tar than to liquid. Before it can be burned, it has to be heated to around 130 degrees Celsius to reduce its viscosity enough to pump and spray into the cylinders. The heating system is part of the engine room's infrastructure. Pipes and heaters managing this fuel from storage to combustion in a continuous loop. There are other engines too, the auxiliary generators that provide electrical power to the whole ship, the cargo pumps that move the oil during loading and discharge, the ballast pumps, the firefighting pumps, the air compressors, the sewage treatment system. Every one of them lives in this space, tended by the chief engineer and 3 or 4 assistant engineers who divide their watches and their expertise between them. New crew members sometimes say the hardest thing about the engine room is learning to hear what is normal. The space is never silent, but within the constant sound there are patterns, rhythms, the particular note of each machine running correctly. With time, the engineers learn to hear variations in those rhythms before any instrument shows a change. The machine tells you if you know how to listen. You stop consciously hearing the engine after the first day or 2 at sea. But it is always there, below everything, a pulse that the whole ship is organized around. Steady and low and constant, like a slow heartbeat carrying the voyage forward. Beneath the flat deck, beneath the pipelines and the valves and the slow machinery of the mooring equipment, there is a space that fills most of the ship from stem to stern. This is the cargo section, a series of sealed tanks that together can hold 2 million barrels of crude oil or more on a fully loaded supertanker. 2 million barrels. That is roughly 320 million litres, enough fuel to power a large city for weeks. Crude oil is not a single thing. People tend to picture it as a uniform black liquid, thick and slow, the way it is shown in old photographs of oil wells blowing out of the ground. But crude oil is actually a mixture, and different oil fields around the world produce crude of different qualities. Some crude is light, almost golden, and flows like water. Some is heavy and dark and barely moves at room temperature. Some has high sulfur content and is called sour crude. Some has very little sulfur and is called sweet. The particular crude a tanker is carrying determines how the tanks are managed throughout the voyage. Heavier crude oils can begin to congeal if they cool too much. On long voyages through cold water, particularly in northern passages, the cargo heating system is used to keep the oil above a minimum temperature. Steam coils run along the bottom of the cargo tanks, warmed by a boiler in the engine room, gently maintaining the temperature of hundreds of thousands of tons of petroleum through weather and cold and dark. It is a slow, continuous process invisible from the outside, running day and night for the entire length of the voyage. The tanks themselves are built into the ship's structure. A modern oil tanker uses what is called a double hull design. There is an outer shell, the part of the ship you can see, and inside that, separated by a void space of about 2 meters, there is an inner hull that actually contains the cargo. This design became mandatory for new tankers under international maritime regulations following the Exxon Valdez disaster of 1989, when the ship ran aground off Alaska and spilled around 37,000 tons of crude oil into Prince William Sound. The double hull means that if the outer shell is damaged in a grounding or collision, the inner hull acts as a second barrier before any cargo can reach the sea. The void space between the two hulls is not empty. It is an inspectable, accessible space, walked through regularly by crew doing hull inspections. The crew members who go into these enclosed spaces follow strict safety procedures because the void spaces, like the cargo tanks themselves when not in use, can accumulate gases that displace oxygen. Confined space entry on a tanker is a formally controlled process, with gas testing before entry, a standby person at the entrance, and communication maintained throughout. The cargo tanks themselves are protected by what is called an inert gas system. Because crude oil vapors mixed with air at the right concentration can be explosive, the space above the oil inside each tank is filled with inert gas, typically the exhaust gas from the ship's boilers after it has been cleaned and cooled. This gas contains very little oxygen. Without oxygen, there can be no ignition. The inert gas system runs continuously while cargo is aboard, maintaining a slight positive pressure in each tank to keep outside air from entering. It is one of the most important safety systems on the ship, and it operates almost without notice, a quiet presence in the background of everything else. The oil in the tanks moves with the ship, not dramatically, not with the force of water in an open container, but with a slow, heavy roll that follows the motion of the sea beneath the hull. In calm conditions, there is very little movement at all. In heavier weather, there is what engineers call sloshing, a slow rhythmic shift of the cargo from one side of a partially filled tank to the other. Cargo officers keep track of how full each tank is and can transfer oil between tanks to manage the motion. The goal is always stability, always balance, always the long unbroken rhythm of a voyage that does not call attention to itself. Below the waterline, in sealed tanks in the dark, the crude oil rests. It was made over millions of years from the organic material of ancient seas. It travelled from a well in the ground to a pipeline to a loading terminal to this ship. And now it sits in the dark and waits, quietly, to arrive. The ship is fully at sea now. No other lights visible anywhere on the horizon. The ocean has opened up around it completely, and at the very top of the superstructure, 6 or 7 decks above the main deck, and perhaps 35 meters above the surface of the water, there is a room where one person stands alone and watches the dark. The bridge of an oil tanker at night is unlike almost any other working environment on Earth. It is a wide room, stretching across the full width of the ship, with large windows on every forward-facing side. During the day, those windows frame a view of the deck below and the horizon beyond it. At night, they frame something harder to describe, a darkness that is not quite uniform, because the sea has its own faint texture even without light, and the sky above has whatever stars or cloud is present, and the ship's navigation lights cast a soft, low glow at the edges of things. The lighting inside the bridge is reduced at night to almost nothing. The instruments glow softly. The radar screens display their quiet circles. The rotating sweep, picking up any other vessel within range and marking it as a small shape on the display. The electronic chart display, which shows the ship's position and planned route in real time, is set to a night mode that keeps the colours dim and easy on the eyes. The officer on watch moves between these displays, stepping to the windows periodically to scan the horizon with binoculars, then stepping back. Modern large tankers are required to carry an automatic identification system transponder, which broadcasts the ship's position, heading, speed, and identity to other ships and to coast stations via VHF radio. Every other vessel with AIS also broadcasts, so the radar screen shows not just anonymous shapes, but named ships with their speeds and courses displayed alongside them. The officer on watch can see, at a glance, whether any vessel in the vicinity is on a course that could bring it close, and how much time is available before a decision needs to be made. On most of the night, on an ocean passage well away from shipping lanes, no decision is needed. The ship is on autopilot, following the programmed route with small automated corrections to the rudder. The officer is there not because the ship needs constant steering, but because the regulations require a human watchkeeper, and because the sea is not predictable, and because no automated system yet built can respond with the full range of judgment that a trained officer can. The watch lasts 4 hours. On a typical ship, the officers work a 4 hours on, 8 hours off rotation. The midnight to 4 watch, which sailors sometimes call the graveyard watch, is regarded by some as the hardest and by others as the best. The hardest because it cuts directly through the deepest hours of sleep, pulling the officer from bed at 23:45 to be on the bridge at midnight, alert and capable. The best because, in good weather, those 4 hours can be among the most genuinely quiet a person will ever experience. No traffic on the radio, no movement on the radar, no activity on the deck. Just the ship and the dark and the instruments glowing softly and the water passing below. Some officers say they do their best thinking on the graveyard watch. With nothing demanding attention and everything running smoothly, the mind is present but not pressured. It rests in a particular kind of alertness that is not quite like anything else. Wide awake but calm, watching without looking for anything specific, listening to a silence that is not quite silence. At the end of 4 hours, the relief officer arrives, and the exchange of information takes 2 minutes. And then the watch is handed over, and the officer, who was alone with the ocean, goes below and sleeps. The officer coming off the graveyard watch knows something about the sea that takes years to learn, and cannot easily be taught in a classroom. It is not exactly knowledge, and it is not exactly instinct. It is closer to attention. The kind of attention that comes from spending enough time with something that you begin to understand its language. The ocean has a language, not a dramatic one, not a loud one. It speaks in the way water changes colour at depth, in the way a swell shifts its direction hours before the wind that made it arrives, in the way certain skies at certain latitudes produce weather that the instruments confirm after the eye has already noticed it. The colour of the water changes with depth, with temperature, and with what lives in it. In the deep open ocean, far from any coastline or shallow bank, The water is a dark, rich blue that looks almost black when the sky is overcast. As a ship approaches shallower water, the color lightens, shifting through greens and lighter blues. Experienced navigators learn to read these shifts as a secondary confirmation of what the charts are already showing. The eye sees the color change, and the mind registers the information, even on a subconscious level, before any formal check has been made. The surface of the water carries information about what is happening below and what is coming from ahead. A particular kind of chop, short and steep, indicates wind against current. Long, regular swells from a single direction indicate a storm system somewhere behind them, perhaps hundreds of miles away, generating energy that travels faster than the weather itself. Seabirds change their behavior when weather is approaching. The barometric pressure on the bridge instruments falls slowly at first, and then more quickly. These signals do not all arrive at once, and they do not all point to the same conclusion with equal reliability. Reading them is a matter of weighing many quiet observations against each other and arriving at a judgment. Before GPS became the standard navigation system in the 1990s, officers navigated by a combination of dead reckoning and celestial observation. Dead reckoning is the practice of calculating your current position based on your last known position, your speed, your heading, and how much time has passed. It works well over short periods, but accumulates error over long ones. Celestial navigation corrects that error by taking an accurate fix from the stars, the sun, or the moon. The instrument used is called a sextant. It is a handheld optical device that measures the angle between a celestial body and the horizon. By measuring that angle precisely and recording the exact time of the observation, a navigator can calculate the ship's latitude and longitude with very good accuracy. A skilled navigator with a sextant can determine position to within a mile or two, which on an open ocean is more than adequate. The calculation requires a set of tables, an accurate clock, and a clear view of the horizon and the sky. It requires patience and practice. And it requires the navigator to stand on the bridge wing, sextant raised, eye to the eyepiece, and to take the reading at exactly the right moment, when the observed body sits on the horizon's edge. Most modern tankers still carry sextants. They are no longer the primary navigation method. GPS provides continuous, accurate positioning to within a few meters, but the sextant is kept, maintained, and used in practice because the sea has a long memory for what happens when the electricity fails. The officers who learned navigation before GPS became universal carry a particular relationship to the sky that younger officers are beginning to recover, partly out of regulatory requirement, and partly out of genuine interest. There is something in the act of measuring a star's position that connects to the voyage in a way that reading a GPS coordinate does not. The star is actually there, and you are actually here. And the angle between you is real and measurable, and tells you where on the surface of the earth you are standing. The ocean teaches this slowly, the way it teaches everything, over time and with attention, and with the willingness to keep watching. There are roughly 1.9 million seafarers working on merchant ships around the world at any given time. Of those, a significant proportion, somewhere around a quarter, come from the Philippines. Others come from India, China, Ukraine, Russia, Indonesia, Greece, and dozens of other countries. A crew of 25 people on a large tanker might represent 6 or 7 nationalities, speaking different first languages, observing different customs, and carrying very different relationships to the sea. What they share is a set of international certifications that establish a common minimum standard for professional competence. These are governed by the STCW Convention, the Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, which is administered by the International Maritime Organization and followed by maritime nations worldwide. Every officer on a tanker has passed the same internationally recognized examinations. Every certificate has a specific expiry date and renewal requirement. The sea is one of the few professions where your qualifications mean exactly the same thing in every country in the world. A typical tanker has a captain who is called the master and who holds ultimate legal authority for the vessel, the crew, and the cargo. Below the master are 3 deck officers, typically called the chief officer, the second officer, and the third officer. These 4 people share the navigational watches and the management of deck operations. The chief officer is responsible for cargo operations, stability calculations, and the maintenance of the ship's deck equipment. The second officer is usually the navigator, responsible for charts and navigation planning. The third officer typically handles safety equipment and the medical first aid role. In the engine department, the chief engineer is responsible for all machinery, supported by 2 or 3 assistant engineers. There are also engine room ratings, who are the equivalent of deckhands in the engine department, carrying out maintenance and operations under the engineer's supervision. In the deck department, the bosun leads the deck ratings in the daily work of maintaining the ship's exterior, handling lines, operating valves, and keeping the pipework in good condition. The cook is one of the most important people on any ship. 3 meals a day, every day, for the duration of the voyage, for a crew of 20 to 30 people with different food preferences, dietary requirements, and national tastes. On a good ship, the cook is treated with a degree of respect that reflects this. On a difficult voyage, when the weather is bad and the crew is tired and the watch schedule has been unforgiving, a good meal in the mess room can reset the atmosphere of the entire ship in an hour. The mess room is where the social life of the ship happens. On most tankers, there is 1 mess for officers and 1 for ratings, though customs vary. Meal times are fixed, but the mess room also functions as a sitting room in between. Someone watching a film on a laptop, someone reading, someone playing cards with 2 or 3 others. Occasionally, someone sleeping in a chair when their watch allows for nothing more than that. The cabins are small but private. Each officer has a cabin to themselves, usually with a bunk, a desk, a wardrobe, and a porthole. Some ships have en-suite bathrooms. On older vessels, the bathroom facilities are shared. The cabins are where the crew goes between watches, where they sleep and read and make video calls home to families, in countries they will not see again for months. The contracts are typically 4 to 5 months long for officers, sometimes longer for ratings. During that time, the ship is the whole world. The routines of work and rest and meals create a structure that most crew members say they find easier than expected. The predictability of it is a kind of comfort. You know when you will eat, when you will work, when you will sleep. The ocean handles the rest. The third officer finishes the 4 to 8 morning watch at 0800 and goes below for breakfast. At 08:30, she is in her cabin. By 08:45, in all probability, she is asleep. Sleep at sea has a quality that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not experienced it. The people who have tend to describe it in similar terms: heavier, faster, more complete. The kind of sleep that arrives quickly and without negotiation, that holds you under its surface until the alarm sounds, and that leaves you feeling as if the full time has actually been used rather than just passed through. There are several reasons for this. Some of them are physiological, and some of them are environmental, and some of them are simply the product of a working life that makes genuine tiredness available in a way that many shore-based jobs do not. The watch system is the structure everything else is built around. Officers work 4 hours on, 8 hours off, rotating through the 24-hour clock in a cycle that repeats. The midnight to 4 and the noon to 4 share one officer. The 4 to 8, morning and afternoon, share another. The 8 to midnight has the third. This means each officer gets 2 watches in every 24 hours, with 8 hours between each one. In theory, 8 hours is enough time to sleep adequately. In practice, meals, paperwork, cargo management, maintenance responsibilities, and the simple difficulty of adjusting a sleep schedule to unconventional hours means the actual sleep window is usually 6 hours or less. This is why the sleep that does come tends to go deep. The body takes what it can when it can, and it becomes efficient about it. Crew members on long voyages often describe the sensation of getting into their bunk after a watch and falling asleep within minutes. The way a person falls asleep when they are genuinely, unambiguously tired rather than just lying in bed thinking they should be. The environment helps. The ship is never fully silent, but the sounds that fill it at sea are consistent and low. The engine hum comes through the hull, felt as much as heard, a vibration that runs through the mattress and the bulkhead and the floor. Research into sleep quality has found that certain types of low-frequency vibration and rhythmic motion can encourage the brain to move more quickly into deeper stages of sleep. The rocking of a ship, even a large ship in mild weather, produces a gentle motion that many crew members say they come to associate so strongly with sleep that they miss it when they are home on shore. Some describe lying in a perfectly still bed on land and feeling something is wrong, that the absence of motion where they have come to expect it keeps the mind slightly alert when it should be settling. The sea, on calm days, also removes from the immediate environment most of the sounds that interrupt sleep on land. No traffic, no voices from outside, no doors, no sirens, no notifications. The ship's intercom is used for genuine emergencies only during rest hours. A crew at sea develops a collective understanding that sleep is a shared resource. You do not disturb another person's rest without good reason. A full voyage of 18 or 20 days at sea, properly settled into the watch routine, gives the body time to find its rhythm. The first 2 or 3 days are often the adjustment period, where the watch system feels unnatural, and the sleep comes in awkward fragments. By the end of the first week, most crew members report sleeping better than they do at home. By the middle of the voyage, the rhythm is so established that the body begins to anticipate it, waking naturally a few minutes before the alarm, ready without urgency, the machinery of the ship already part of its own background. The third officer sleeps, the ship moves. Outside, the ocean continues to do what it has been doing since long before any of this existed. She wakes at 15:45 for the 4 to 8 evening watch, gets dressed in the dark of her cabin, and walks up to the bridge. The sun is still above the horizon. By the time her watch ends at 2000, it will be gone, and if the sky is clear, which tonight it is, the stars will have come out in a way that most people who live on land have never seen and will never see. 500 miles from any coastline, with no city or town or oil platform within range to throw light into the lower atmosphere, the sky at night is something else entirely. The stars are not a background detail, they are the main event. They fill the sky not as points of light against darkness, but as a collective brightness, so dense in the part of the sky that becomes the Milky Way that the galaxy's structure is clearly visible. A pale river of light arching from one horizon to the other. Astronomers measure sky darkness using something called the Bortle scale, which runs from 1, the darkest possible sky, to 9, the washed out sky above a large city. A sky above a major city sits at around 8 or 9 on that scale. A sky above an offshore ship on a clear night in the middle of an ocean, far from any shipping lane and far from any coast, can reach as close to 1 as most living people will ever experience. At that level of darkness, the number of individual stars visible to the naked eye increases from the few hundred a city dweller might see on a clear night to somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000. The Andromeda Galaxy, which is 2.5 million light-years away, and the most distant object visible to the naked eye, appears as a faint smear of light slightly off-center in the northern sky. The Magellanic Clouds, which are satellite galaxies of the Milky Way, are visible from the southern hemisphere as 2 bright patches near the constellation of the Southern Cross. Before GPS, these stars were tools, not metaphors, not sources of wonder, but actual instruments of navigation, as practical and specific as a ruler. The stars that matter most for celestial navigation each have names, most of them Arabic in origin, given by the astronomers of the medieval Islamic world, who were doing the most careful sky observations during the centuries when European astronomy was largely dormant. Sirius, Vega, Arcturus, Betelgeuse, Aldebaran. Each one has a known position in the sky at every moment of every day, recorded in a publication called the Nautical Almanac, which is updated annually and carried aboard every ocean-going vessel that maintains the practice of celestial navigation. To take a star sight, the navigator steps onto the bridge wing with a sextant and identifies the star. They bring the star's image down to the horizon through the instrument's mirrors, measuring the angle precisely. The exact time of the observation is noted to the second because the Earth is rotating, and a difference of 4 seconds in the recorded time produces an error of roughly 1 nautical mile in the calculated position. The observation is then worked through a set of tables to produce a line of position, and 2 or 3 such lines from different stars, taken within a few minutes of each other, produce a fix, a confirmed point on the surface of the Earth. Modern officers practice this. The GPS is running, accurate and continuous, showing position to within a few meters. The sextant sight produces a fix within a mile or 2, which the officer plots on the chart and compares with the GPS position. The 2 agree, or they are very close. The officer notes the result in the navigational workbook and puts the sextant away. It is practice for a circumstance that may never come. And it is something else too. something harder to categorize. A way of staying connected to a method that predates all the technology on the bridge by centuries. A direct line back to the navigators who crossed these same oceans with these same stars and no other guidance, reading the sky with patience and precision and arriving across thousands of miles where they intended to be. The evening watch ends at 2000. The stars are fully out now. The officer passes the watch to the next person, exchanges a brief account of what is on the radar and what the weather is doing, and goes below. The stars continue their slow arc across the sky. The ship holds its course beneath them. The ocean carries them both, the stars and the ship and the sleeping crew, through the dark and toward whatever morning is coming. There are days in a tanker's life when she carries no oil at all. The cargo has been discharged at the terminal. The tanks have been cleaned, and the ship is making her way back to the loading port empty. Or nearly empty. Because a ship that rides too high in the water with its propeller half exposed and its flat bottom catching every wave like a sail is a dangerous and unmanageable thing. So the engineers do something counterintuitive. They fill the empty cargo tanks and the dedicated ballast tanks with seawater, pumping hundreds of thousands of tons of ocean back into the hull, pushing the ship down to a safe and stable waterline. This is ballast. The word comes from the Old Norse word for load, and sailors have been using heavy material to stabilize empty ships for as long as ships have existed. Early vessels used stone, sand, and lead. Later, they used iron and gravel. Modern tankers use the ocean itself, which is conveniently available in unlimited quantities and costs nothing to acquire. The management of ballast on a large tanker is a precise science governed by calculations that the chief officer performs before any ballast operation begins. The goal is to achieve a specific draft, which is the depth of hull below the waterline, and a specific trim, which is the difference in draft between the bow and the stern. Most tankers ride with a slight stern trim, meaning the ship sits a little deeper at the back than at the front. This improves the efficiency of the propeller, which works better when it is fully submerged, and it keeps the bow light enough to lift over waves rather than ploughing through them. Beyond draft and trim, the chief officer is managing something called the ship's stability. Stability, in the nautical sense, describes how a ship behaves when it is heeled over by a wave or by wind, and specifically, how effectively it returns to upright. A ship with good stability has a low center of gravity and will return smartly from a heel. A ship with poor stability, one with too much weight too high up or too little ballast in the right places, can become sluggish or, in extreme cases, fail to return from a large heel at all. Calculations that govern this are documented in the ship's stability booklet, a document specific to each vessel that contains curves and tables calculated from the ship's own physical dimensions. The chief officer works through these calculations on the vessel's loading computer, which is a dedicated software system that models the ship's condition based on the weights entered for each tank. Before any major change in loading or ballasting, the stability is checked, the figures are confirmed, and only then does the operation proceed. What this means in practice, for the experience of being on the ship, is that a properly ballasted tanker in moderate weather barely moves. The enormous hull, riding at the right waterline with weight distributed correctly through all its tanks, has an inertia that absorbs most of what the sea sends against it. In the passenger cabins of cruise ships, which are much lighter and higher-sided vessels, the motion of the sea is felt clearly in anything above a moderate swell. On a loaded VLCC in the same sea state, a person sitting in the mess room might need to look out a porthole to confirm that the sea is rough at all. The ship simply absorbs it deeply and quietly and continues. The ocean pushes. The ship holds its shape. The ballast in the tanks shifts just slightly, following the roll, counterbalancing and settling, doing what water has always done, finding its level. The barometer in the corner of the bridge has been falling for 6 hours. Not quickly, not in the sharp, alarming way that precedes the worst weather. Steadily, without drama, at a rate that the second officer has been watching and noting in the bridge log every hour. A falling barometer means falling atmospheric pressure. Falling pressure means a weather system is approaching. The sea has not yet changed to reflect this, but it will. By midday, the swell has lengthened. This is the first visible sign. The wave period, which is the time between one wave crest and the next, has increased. Instead of short, choppy waves running close together, the sea is producing long, smooth rollers with 30 or 40 seconds between them. Long-period swells like these are generated by storms far away, sometimes hundreds of miles off, and they travel ahead of the weather that made them. Experienced officers know this signal as clearly as a road sign. By the afternoon, the wind has picked up. The sea surface loses its smoothness and begins to show streaks of white, lines of foam running in the direction of the wind. The ship begins to move with a purpose it did not have this morning, rising slowly to the swells and falling back with a weight and deliberateness that puts everything on the ship into a slightly different relationship with gravity. A supertanker in heavy weather behaves very differently from a small vessel. Where a small boat is pushed around by the sea, climbing steep faces and crashing into troughs, a fully loaded VLCC is too large and too heavy for the ocean to push. It meets the waves on its own terms. The bow rises to a swell slowly, carries over the crest, and descends the other side in a long, smooth arc that feels more like a hill than a wave. The roll, when it comes, is gradual and wide. It might take 12 or 15 seconds for the ship to roll from one side to the other and back, a slow, majestic pendulum whose period is determined by the ship's size and loading condition. Inside the ship, during heavy weather, the main change is the constant, low-level physical awareness of motion. Things left on flat surfaces need to be secured. Walking from one end of a corridor to the other requires a hand on the rail. Meals in the galley are eaten with one hand monitoring the plate, because even on a large, stable ship in a genuine gale, the motion is present and constant. The cook uses fiddles, which are metal bars fitted along the edges of the galley stove to keep pots in place. The mess table has non-slip matting. The captain receives the updated weather routing from the vessel's weather routing service, a shore-based company that tracks the ship's position and the forecast in combination, and recommends course adjustments to avoid the worst of the system. Sometimes this means a small deviation, adding a few hours to the passage to pass behind a low-pressure area. Sometimes the weather is unavoidable and the ship simply goes through. When the storm passes, and it always does, there is a particular quality to the sea that follows. The sky clears from the west. The wind drops more quickly than the swell does, because wind responds to the weather system directly, but swell takes time to settle. The result is a day or two of confused, irregular sea after heavy weather, with swell running from the direction of the departed storm, and smaller waves from the new wind running across it at an angle. The ship moves in a complicated, unpatterned way through this aftermath. Neither the smooth progression of calm water nor the regular roll of established weather, but something between the two, a gentle disorder that gradually resolves itself, and then calm returns. The swell lies down, the sea goes flat, the sky goes wide and blue and empty. The ship runs through all of it, in rough weather and in still, at the same 12 to 14 knots, on the same heading, with the same low hum from the engine room below, and the same slow white wake behind. It is early morning, and the third officer is on the bridge wing with a coffee, and the kind of stillness that belongs specifically to the hour just after sunrise at sea. The weather from 2 days ago has gone. The ocean has returned to the long, glassy swell of settled conditions, and the sky is the pale washed blue of morning before the sun has fully established itself. She looks down at the bow wave and sees them before she registers what they are. A dozen shapes moving through the water just ahead of the ship's hull, riding the pressure wave that the bow pushes ahead of itself, surfacing and diving in a rhythm that is so effortless and regular that it takes a moment to understand what she is watching. Dolphins, a pod of common dolphins, swimming with the ship in the way that dolphins have been swimming with ships for as long as there have been ships to swim with. Bow riding is not unique to dolphins. Porpoises do it too, and occasionally small whales. The mechanics are well understood. The bow wave of a moving vessel creates a region of compressed water just ahead of the hull that an animal can position itself within and be carried forward with almost no effort. The animal matches the ship's speed, not by swimming harder, but by holding its position in the wave, lifted and propelled by water that the ship is already displacing. Some researchers believe that dolphins seek out bow waves, not only for the energetic benefit, but because they appear to genuinely enjoy the experience. The play element in dolphin behavior is well documented. Bow riding, when you watch it, looks nothing like feeding or migration or escape. It looks like play. They stay for 30 minutes. Then, as suddenly as they appeared, they are gone, peeling off to either side of the bow and disappearing into the blue-green water without ceremony. The ocean is not empty. It never is, even in the deepest, most remote parts of the crossing. Flying fish break the surface in scattered groups, usually startled by the approach of the hull. They launch themselves into the air with a burst of speed from their powerful tail fins, spread their enlarged pectoral fins like wings, and glide for distances that seem impossible given their size, sometimes 30 or 40 meters before curving back into the water. Occasionally, one misjudges and lands on the deck. The bosun sometimes finds them in the morning during his rounds, small silver bodies lying on the steel near the rail, and returns them to the sea. Seabirds are the most constant companions on a long ocean passage. The species change with the latitude and the ocean basin, but there is almost always something in the air. In the North Atlantic, northern fulmars follow ships for days, riding the updrafts from the hull and superstructure with no apparent effort. Their stiff-winged gliding so precisely adjusted to the wind that they travel without a single wing beat for minutes at a time. In southern latitudes, albatrosses appear. The wandering albatross has the largest wingspan of any living bird, reaching up to 3.4 meters across. It is built for the Southern Ocean, for the constant strong winds of the roaring 40s and the furious 50s, latitudes where the wind blows uninterrupted around the globe with nothing but water to slow it. An albatross following a ship can stay in company for days without landing. It sleeps on the wing, resting one half of its brain at a time, while the other maintains enough awareness to manage its flight. It eats from the ocean surface when it needs to, dipping to snatch squid and fish in a movement so quick and precise that it is barely an interruption to the glide. The crew of working ships have always regarded albatrosses with a particular respect. The association between the albatross and the safety of the voyage runs deep in maritime tradition, old enough and widespread enough that it says something about the bird, about what it means to see something that thrives in a place where nothing is easy, moving through it with complete grace. She finishes her coffee. The dolphins are long gone. Far astern, barely visible, an albatross banks into a long curve and disappears behind the ship's wake. The route the ship is sailing today is one that supertankers almost never travel. The canal ahead is not built for vessels of this size, but smaller tankers, Aframax and Suezmax class ships, do pass through canals regularly, and the experience of doing so is worth following, because it is one of the strangest things that happens in the working life of a ship built for open ocean. The Suez Canal cuts through Egypt for 193 kilometers, connecting the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea and saving a ship traveling from Europe to Asia approximately 7,000 kilometers compared to sailing around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. It has no locks. The sea level at both ends is essentially the same, and the canal is simply a channel dug through the land, wide enough for modern vessels to pass, and deep enough for most, though not all, of the world's largest ships. A ship approaches the canal from the north, through the Mediterranean, or from the south, through the Red Sea. Either way, before it enters, a canal pilot comes aboard. This is a local maritime officer employed by the Suez Canal Authority, who is licensed and trained specifically for the navigation of that waterway. The pilot boards from a small launch that comes alongside the moving ship, climbs the pilot ladder up the side of the hull, and makes his way to the bridge. From that point, until the ship exits the other end of the canal, usually between 12 and 16 hours later, the pilot is in charge of the navigation. The ship's captain remains on the bridge throughout, legally responsible for the vessel, but operationally, the pilot gives the helm orders. The canal itself is strange in the way that all narrow channels are strange for large ships. After days or weeks of open ocean, where the entire visible world is water and sky and nothing is close, the canal reduces the navigable space to a few hundred meters of width. The banks are visible on both sides. In places, the canal runs through desert, and the view from the bridge is brown sand and blue sky, and the improbable fact of a ship. In other places, there are towns, roads, people. A child on a bicycle might look up from a riverbank road and see the hull of a tanker passing at 10 kilometers per hour, so close and so enormous that it fills the view entirely. Transit through the canal happens in convoys. Ships assemble at the northern or southern entrance and proceed in a managed sequence, using passing bays at intervals where one convoy can wait while another passes in the opposite direction. The pace is slow, partly because of the canal's width restrictions, and partly because a ship travelling too fast in the confined waterway creates a bank effect that can pull its own hull into the sides. Speed is controlled precisely throughout. The Panama Canal is more dramatic still. It has locks. Ships are lifted in stages from sea level at one ocean up to the height of Garden Lake at 26 meters above sea level, cross the lake, and then descend through another set of locks to sea level on the other side. The original locks, built between 1904 and 1914, are 305 meters long and 33 meters wide. For decades after their construction, a ship's maximum beam, which is its width, was dictated by whether it could fit through these locks. The category is still in use today. A Panamax vessel is the largest ship that can transit the original locks. The expanded locks, opened in 2016, accommodate larger new Panamax vessels. What the crew describes about canal transit, uniformly, is the claustrophobia of it after open water. Not genuine distress, but a heightened awareness of proximity that the open ocean never produces. The water passing beneath the hull is the same water. The sky above is the same sky. But the land on either side changes everything about how the space feels. When the ship exits the other end, and the banks begin to widen and fall away, and the open ocean opens up ahead again, there is reportedly a collective relaxation on the bridge. The shoulders come down, the conversation loosens, the pilot disembarks, the engine is brought to full sea speed, and the ship does what it was built to do. It spreads out into the wide water and finds its pace again. Somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the ship is as far from land as it is possible to be on this particular route. The nearest coastline is more than 1,000 kilometers away in any direction. The nearest other vessel, according to the AIS display on the bridge, is 80 nautical miles to the east and travelling in the opposite direction. The ocean out here is genuinely, completely empty, in the way that very few places on Earth are genuinely empty. Communication still happens. It happens all the time via satellite. The ship has a VSAT antenna mounted above the bridge, a small dome that tracks the satellite constantly and provides an internet connection that allows officers to send emails, make video calls home, check the news, and receive operational instructions from the company's technical management team ashore. The bandwidth is not fast by land standards, and the connection can drop in bad weather when the antenna loses the satellite. But for most of the voyage, it is there, a thin thread connecting the ship to everywhere else. The satellite phone is different. It is the backup communication system, the one that works when the internet does not, and it can connect to any phone number in the world, from any position on any ocean. Officers use it for personal calls when the internet is down. Shipping companies use it to reach the captain in emergencies. The distress functions of the GMDSS, the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, operate over satellite and over VHF and MF radio simultaneously, so that a ship in trouble can reach the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center for any ocean from anywhere on it. Before VSAT became standard equipment, which happened gradually through the 2000s and 2010s, the connection to shore was much thinner. Satellite calls were expensive enough to be rationed. Emails were batched and sent once or twice a day through a slower system. In the era before satellite communication altogether, ships maintained position by radio, sending and receiving weather information and company communications through high-frequency radio transmissions that bounced off the ionosphere across thousands of miles. There is a frequency called Channel 16 on the VHF radio that is kept open at all times on every vessel at sea. It is the International Distress and Calling Channel, monitored by all ships and by coast stations worldwide. Very little happens on it most of the time on an open ocean passage. A call from another vessel asking to switch to a working channel for a routine exchange. An automated broadcast from a coast station giving navigation warnings for the area. Occasionally, rarely, a distress call. The sound of a clear VHF radio in the middle of an ocean is mostly the soft, low hiss of an open channel with nothing to say. The crew's relationship to the world left behind is complex and varies considerably between individuals. Some officers say they find the separation restful. The obligations and noise of shore life fall away, and what remains is the work at hand, the ship, the ocean, and the watch system that structures everything. Others say the distance is the hardest part, that they manage it by keeping contact regular and calls short, because long calls leave them feeling the separation more acutely than the brief connection resolves it. Families develop their own accommodations, video calls on fixed schedules, the same day and time each week, wherever the ship is in the world. Messages sent, knowing they will be read hours later when the other person wakes up. Photographs, the particular grammar of a relationship conducted partly across 10,000 kilometers of ocean, in which the small details of an ordinary day carry more weight than they would if the two people were in the same house. Children of seafarers grow up knowing a particular version of absence that is different from other kinds. The parent is not gone in the way that gone usually means. They are somewhere specific, doing something specific, connected by a thin satellite thread. They send voice messages at odd hours. They appear on a screen in a cabin somewhere over the horizon. They are out there, unreachably present. The ocean holds the ship. The satellite holds the thread. And somewhere on the other side of the world, people who love the crew go about their days, carrying that thread without thinking about it. The way you carry a fact you learned long ago that has simply become part of the way you understand the world. It arrives without announcement. 1 hour the horizon is clear, sharp and distinct as a ruled line. Then the line softens. Then it disappears. Then the world narrows to the length of the ship, and then to less than that, and the fog is complete. Sea fog forms when warm, moist air moves over colder water. The temperature difference causes the moisture in the air to condense, not falling as rain, but staying suspended, filling the space between the surface and the sky with a dense, even whiteness that eliminates distance entirely. In certain regions and certain seasons, it is a near daily occurrence. The Grand Banks off Newfoundland are among the foggiest waters in the world, where the warm Gulf Stream meets the cold Labrador Current, and the result is a persistent fog bank that earned the waters a reputation among early transatlantic sailors as being among the most dangerous in the Northern Hemisphere. On the bridge, the response to fog is immediate and procedural. Speed is reduced. The foghorn begins its cycle, a deep, resonant blast every 2 minutes, as required by the international regulations for preventing collisions at sea. An additional watchkeeper is called to the bridge. The radar goes to its shortest range scale and is watched continuously. The officer of the watch moves between the radar and the bridge windows, monitoring both the electronic picture and the small grey visibility-limited world outside. The sound of a foghorn on a large vessel is one of the more remarkable sounds a ship produces. It is not the thin, reedy sound of a small boat's horn. It is low and full and resonant, produced by a large air-powered horn mounted on the mast or the funnel, and at close range it is felt as much as heard. A pressure in the chest, a vibration in the air. In fog, where sound behaves differently because the moisture in the air carries it further, and the absence of wind reduces its dispersion, a foghorn carries for miles. Other ships' horns can be heard in fog long before their radar returns confirm their position. There is a silence around fog that is different from the ordinary silence of a calm day at sea. The water itself seems quieter. The wave sounds damped by the heavy air. The ship's own sounds become more present by contrast. The engine hum and the creak of the hull, and the occasional drip of condensation from the rigging. The visibility is so reduced that the watch officer cannot see the bow from the bridge. The front of the ship is somewhere out there in the grey, but the grey is uniform and textureless and gives nothing back. Experienced officers often describe fog watches as some of the most mentally demanding and some of the most meditative simultaneously. The demand comes from maintaining full alertness for a threat that is invisible and potentially very close. The meditative quality comes from the radical narrowing of the world. There is nothing to see. There is nothing to look at except the instruments and the grey. The mind cannot wander to the horizon because there is no horizon. It settles, by necessity, into a close, sustained attention to the immediate. Fog lifts the way it arrived. Gradually, without announcement, the grey begins to take on texture. Shapes appear within it, a darker area that becomes a wave, a lighter patch that becomes sky. And then, sometimes all at once, the fog tears apart, and the horizon is back, clear and distant. And the sun is there, and the ocean is blue again, and the ship's speed can be resumed. The foghorn gives its last required blast and goes silent. The extra watchkeeper thanks the officer and goes below. The world opens back up to its full breadth and depth, and the ship finds its place in it again, a small thing on a wide ocean, moving steadily toward where it is going. The voyage is nearly over. 17 days since the loading terminal. 17 days of open water, and watch rotations and meals in the mess room, and stars and weather, and the quiet, sustained company of the sea. And now, on the radar screen, at a range of 40 nautical miles, the coastline has appeared as a faint shape along the edge of the display. Land is out there, not visible yet, but there. The radar says so, and so does the GPS, and so does the subtle change in the watercolour that the officer noticed an hour ago, and noted without commenting on. The sea is lighter here. It is shallower. Other ships have appeared on the AIS, more of them, more frequently, converging on the port from various directions, the way vehicles converge on a city from its surrounding roads. The approach begins long before the port is visible. Speed is reduced gradually. The chief officer begins his pre-arrival checks, walking the length of the main deck to verify that the mooring equipment is ready, that the windlass, which is the large winch at the bow that handles the anchor and mooring lines, is operational and ready to go. The mooring lines themselves are massive, braided ropes as thick as a person's arm, each one weighing hundreds of kilograms. They are pulled from the rope store and faked out on deck, ready to be run to the bollards on the berth when the time comes. The pilot boat appears on the horizon 2 hours before the berth. It is a small vessel, purpose-built, with a high-powered engine and a crew of 2 or 3 whose entire working life is spent in the approaches to this port, boarding and departing ships in all conditions. As it approaches, it matches speed with the tanker, pulling alongside the hull at the pilot ladder, which is a rope ladder with wooden rungs that hangs over the side of the ship. The pilot transfers from the launch to the ladder, climbs the side of the hull, and is met at the top by an officer and escorted to the bridge. The pilot knows this port the way the deep-sea officers know the open ocean. He knows the currents in the channel and the behaviour of the wind around the breakwater and the particular quirks of each berth. He confers with the captain, reviews the vessel's dimensions and manoeuvrability data, and then takes the con, the operational control of the ship, for the final approach. The tugs come out as the ship enters the inner harbour. These are small, enormously powerful vessels whose entire purpose is to push and pull very large ships into the small, precise spaces that the berth requires. 2 or 3 tugs will typically work a VLCC into its berth, their lines made fast to the tanker's hull at the bow and stern, their engines working against the ship's inertia to slow and direct something that cannot stop or steer precisely on its own in confined water. It takes time. The ship moves at barely walking speed through the final 100 meters. The mooring gangs ashore are in position, waiting. The first line is thrown from the forecastle, a lighter, heaving line that carries the mooring rope to the dock workers on shore, who haul it across and loop it over the bollard. Then the winch takes the weight and the line comes taut, and the ship is connected to land for the first time in 17 days. More lines go across, 6, 8, sometimes 10 or more, fixing the ship to the berth from multiple points until it is held firmly and the tugs can be released. The pilot gives his final instruction, and when the captain confirms the ship is secure, the engine telegraph is moved for the last time. The telegraph reads, "Finished with engines." Below, in the engine room, the chief engineer acknowledges and begins the shutdown procedure. The engine, which has been running continuously for 17 days, slows. And then it stops. The hum that ran through every surface of the ship, through the bunks and the corridors and the mess room and the bridge, the hum that the crew stopped consciously hearing after the first day out and has not thought about since, goes quiet. The quiet is enormous. It fills the ship completely. Crew members who have been at sea for 3 and 4 months will sometimes say that this moment, the sudden silence after a long passage, is the one they remember most clearly. Not the view of land, not the first phone call home, but the particular quality of the quiet when the engine stops. Everything that was underneath the voyage, all the texture and presence of those weeks at sea, falls away in a single moment, and what is left is a ship at rest, and a crew who made it here, and the ordinary world waiting on the other side of the gangway. The gangway goes down, the port formalities happen, customs officers, port state control inspectors, company representatives, cargo surveyors, all of them come aboard in the first hours, filling the ship with voices and clipboards and the ordinary bureaucratic machinery of international commerce, arriving at a terminal after a long voyage. The captain handles it all from his day room with the particular practiced efficiency of someone who has done this dozens of times. and then the unloading begins. Unloading an oil tanker is not a quick process. It cannot be rushed. The oil moves from the ship's tanks to the shore tanks through pipelines connected at the ship's manifold, the connection point midship, where the loading hoses also attach. The cargo pumps, located deep in the ship in a dedicated pump room below the main deck, drive the oil through the lines at a rate determined by the capacity of the pumps, the diameter of the pipes, and the pressure the shore installation can accept. On a large VLCC, the discharge rate might be around 15,000 cubic meters per hour. Given that a fully loaded vessel might carry 300,000 tons of crude oil, the full discharge can take between 24 and 36 hours of continuous pumping. The pump room is one of the most demanding work environments on the ship. It is hot, loud, and requires careful monitoring throughout the operation. The third officer and the pump man, who is a specialist rating trained specifically for cargo operations, share the watches during discharge, monitoring the pump pressures and the flow rates and the levels in each tank. As each tank empties, the pump must be managed carefully through the final stages. Running a centrifugal cargo pump with no liquid to handle can damage it quickly. Stripping each tank, removing the last fraction of oil from the bottom before switching off or moving to the next, is a practiced skill. As the oil leaves the ship rises. The hull that has been sitting at the deep, loaded waterline for the entire voyage comes up slowly, centimetre by centimetre, as the cargo it has carried across the ocean is pumped ashore. The mooring lines, which were tensioned at the start of the operation, gradually slacken as the hull lifts in the water. The mooring watch adjusts them periodically throughout the night, taking up the slack to keep the ship properly secured to the berth. The crew that is not on watch or involved in cargo operations exists in a particular suspended state during a port call. They are finished with sea watches, but not yet at sea. Some sleep. Some go ashore if the port allows it and the ship's schedule permits. Others spend the time on maintenance work, painting, or the 100 small jobs on a ship that can only be done conveniently when it is not moving through open water. There is a particular quality to the ship in port that is different from the ship at sea. It is not worse, and it is not better. It is simply different. The silence left by the absent engine has been filled by the sound of the cargo pumps working below, and the voices of people coming and going on the gangway, and the sound of the port itself, cranes and vehicles, and the ordinary machinery of a place where ships are always arriving and departing. The ship has been absorbed back into the world it left 17 days ago, and yet it is still unmistakably a ship. The sea smell is on everything. The watch system is still in the crew's bodies, still shaping when they sleep and when they wake. The horizon, invisible from the berth behind the port buildings and the terminal equipment, is somewhere out there. The ocean is somewhere out there. In 36 hours, the discharge will be complete. The last of the cargo will be pumped ashore. The tanks will be empty, and the preparation for the next voyage will begin. Every ship that was ever built has an end. The Seawise Giant, the largest ship in history by tonnage, was bombed during the Iran-Iraq War in 1988 and sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. She was salvaged, repaired, and returned to service under successive names, finally retired in 2004 and sold for scrap. She was broken up at the Alang Shipbreaking Yard in Gujarat, India, in 2010. The largest ship ever built ended her life on a beach, taken apart slowly by hand. Alang is a stretch of coastline on the Gulf of Khambat in western India that has been the world's busiest shipbreaking location for several decades. At its peak in the late 1980s and 1990s, around half of all the world's retired ships came here to be dismantled. The process begins at high tide. The ship is driven under its own power onto the beach at full speed, beaching itself as far up the shore as the tide will carry it. When the tide retreats, the ship is stranded, and the work of taking it apart begins. It is done largely by hand. Workers with cutting torches move through the hull section by section, cutting steel into pieces small enough to be carried off by smaller teams and loaded onto trucks. Everything that can be reused is removed before the cutting starts. Engines, navigation equipment, life-saving appliances, furniture, wiring, pipes, all of it stripped out and sold. What remains is the steel structure, which is melted down and recycled into new steel. The recycled steel from shipbreaking feeds a significant portion of India's construction industry. The conditions at shipbreaking yards have been the subject of serious criticism from labour and environmental organisations over many decades. Workers face exposure to asbestos, which was used extensively in ship construction until the 1980s, as well as to heavy metals, toxic paints, and residual cargo in tanks that have not been fully cleaned. Safety standards have improved considerably since the early days of Alang, partly due to international pressure and partly due to the Hong Kong International Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships, which entered into force in 2025 and established binding standards for ship recycling facilities worldwide. The ship that is being broken down at this moment on this beach may have been at sea for 25 years. In that time, it crossed oceans dozens of times. It moved through the Suez Canal, through equatorial heat, through North Atlantic storms. Its engine ran for years without stopping except at scheduled maintenance intervals. Its crew changed every 4 or 5 months. Hundreds of different people passing through its cabins and its mess room and its bridge, each of them living a portion of their working life inside its hull. All of that is embedded in the steel. Not literally, not in any way that can be measured. But the ship was the setting for all of it, the constant in every scene, the thing that held all those people in all those weathers on all these voyages. And now it is being unmade section by section, torch by torch, until the steel is free of the shape it was given and can be made into something new. The steel that was once a tanker becomes rebar in a building, or the frame of a bridge, or the chassis of a vehicle. It goes on, changed in form but not in substance, into structures that will also eventually be taken apart. The material cycling on through the world without stopping. The way materials have always cycled, the way the oil itself cycled from ancient organic matter into petroleum and into the tanks of a ship and through a refinery and into the products that shape the world. Nothing is lost. Everything becomes something else. There is a ship out there right now, not a metaphor, not a thought experiment, a real ship in the real ocean, traveling at 30 knots through water so dark and deep that no light from any direction reaches the bottom. A real engine turning at 100 revolutions per minute in a room that is warm and loud and carefully tended. A real officer on a real bridge, standing at the window with a coffee, watching the stars wheel slowly over a horizon that is perfectly clean and perfectly dark and perfectly empty. You will never see that ship. In all probability, you will never think about it again after tonight. And it does not need your attention. It does not require anything from you. It will be there whether you think about it or not, moving through the dark, carrying the world's cargo forward, one slow mile at a time, doing what it has always done with a completeness and a steadiness that needs no witness. That is one of the things about the ocean that the crew who know it tend to speak of eventually, when the conversation has gone on long enough and they feel comfortable enough to say the quieter things. The ocean does not care whether you are paying attention. It is not performing. It has no investment in how you feel about it. It was moving before any of us were here, and it will move after. The ships cross it, and the ships pass, and the water closes behind them, and there is no trace. This makes it one of the most restful things in the world to think about at the end of a long day. Not because it is beautiful, though it is. Not because it is vast, though it is. But because it is indifferent in the most calming possible sense of the word. It does not need anything from you tonight. The tankers are already out there. The cargo is already moving. The crude oil is already in the tanks, resting in the dark, waiting to arrive. The cook is already making something simple and warm in the galley. The officer is already watching the radar sweep. The dolphins, somewhere in the Indian Ocean, are already finding the bow wave of some other ship and riding it through the dark for the pure, physics-defying pleasure of it. You do not need to carry any of this. You did not have to be responsible for any of it. The ocean is handling it. The crew is handling it. The slow, wide, indifferent machinery of the world's shipping is doing what it does, quietly, without asking anything of you. Tonight, your job is simpler than theirs. It requires no watch rotation, no stability calculation, no navigation check. It requires only that you let the weight of the day that just ended go the way weight goes when you stop holding it. The way the fog lifts without any help from the ship. The way the swell settles after a storm without anyone having to ask it to. Close your eyes if they are not already closed. The ship is out there. The engine is running. The stars are doing what they have done for billions of years before this night, and will continue to do long after it. Somewhere on the ocean, an albatross is banking into a long, slow curve over black water, riding wind that has been travelling west around the globe for weeks, losing nothing, going on. You do not need to go anywhere tonight. You are already where you are going. The ocean keeps moving. You can rest. If these slow journeys through hidden worlds help you find sleep, please like this video and subscribe to Simple Science. We are here every single day with a new story, a new world to step inside, something worth knowing before the day is done. And if you made it all the way here, to the end of this particular voyage, leave a comment below. Tell us where you are in the world right now, and what time it is. We will be thinking of you, wherever the ocean carries this.